We begin with growing Republican opposition to the Trump administration's efforts to silence dissenting voices. Now, Senator Ted Cruz is blasting the FCC chair for threats he made related to ABC's suspension of Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Look, I like Brendan Carr. He's a good guy. He's the chairman of the FCC. I work closely with him. But what he said there is dangerous as hell. And I got to say, he threatens it. He says, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way.
Yeah.
And I got to say, that's right out of Goodfellas. That's right out of a mafioso coming into a bar going, nice bar you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Wow. And let's not forget that when it comes to free speech in this country, this is the pledge made by President Trump to all Americans during his inaugural address in January.
After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America. Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents, something I know something about. We will not allow that to happen. It will not happen again.
And now, exactly 8 months later, we see through the actions of Trump and his administration that when he made that pledge, he was apparently not speaking to all Americans, but to those in his base, that they should be free to say whatever they want, but not those who would choose to criticize them. And if your speech does not fall in line with what they deem appropriate, then you could see yourself put on a list and see pressure placed on employers to fire you. Or, as we've seen play out, with threats from Trump and the FCC to revoke the licenses of those on television that say things they believe are not nice.
I read someplace that the networks were 97% against me. I get 97% negatives. They give me only bad publicity or press. I mean, they're getting a license. I would think maybe their license should be taken away. They'll take a great story and they'll make it bad. See, I think that's really illegal, personally. When somebody is given 97% of the stories are bad about a person, that's no longer free speech, that's no longer, that's just cheating, and they cheat.
Fox is here. Joining us now, New York Times reporter Jeremy Peters. He is also an MSNBC contributor and staff writer for The Atlantic, Adam Serwer. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining us on the weekend. Jeremy, what does it mean that conservative Republican Senator from Texas, Ted Cruz, is criticizing the FCC chair, not just criticizing him, going all Goodfellas on him?
Exactly, and working on his mafioso accent.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm trying.
Well, I give him credit. You know, he's a guy who memorized the Constitution when he was a kid and used to travel the country performing a recitation of the various amendments. So Ted Cruz knows what he's talking about on this subject, is my point. We will see how much of an outlier is. My guess, judging from the way that very few Republicans and conservatives in the podcast sphere and broader right-wing media world have responded, they are pretty much saying, good job, we're happy to see Jimmy Kimmel go. But the exceptions are folks like Ben Shapiro, who the other day told his audience, look, this is concerning because you know, these podcasters have their own media enterprises. Yeah. They're smart enough to know that when the shoe is on the other foot and the other party is in power, this would be a very dangerous precedent to set. But there aren't that many of them speaking out right now because there is a chill over speech on the left and on the right at the moment. Yeah. People are afraid to speak up if they, like Ted Cruz did, if they think that there is something amiss here. And if you are an expert in the Constitution like Ted Cruz is, how can you look at this and think anything but, oh man, what if they come for me next? when the Republicans are out of power.
Because at some point, that is what's going to happen. Adam, I want to go to you. You wrote something this week. The Constitution protects Jimmy Kimmel's mistake. And you write, the Trump administration does not subscribe to the theory that the Constitution protects speech opposed by people in power. For a long time, Republicans have adhered to a definition of free speech that could be simply summarized as conservatives can say what they want and everyone else can say what conservatives want. That is now the policy of the Trump administration. My dad was in the Army. And when I was a kid and learning about the Civil Rights Movement, I came home and I was like, wait, so you fight for the rights of people who would hate us as black people? And he said, yeah, my job as someone in the Army is to fight for the rights of everyone in this country to do whatever they want and to say whatever they want, even if it's against me. And that has always been my understanding of the First Amendment as a kid. But help me understand now how the Republican Party finds itself on the opposite end of that it's no longer, it seems, about allowing people to say whatever they want. I remember just a couple of years ago, they were, folks on the right were complaining that, they couldn't joke about anything. They couldn't say anything without this quote unquote woke mob coming after them.
Well, I want to say two things. One, the history of black people in the United States of America is the defense of principles that were not applied or extended to them. Mm-hmm. And that, is particularly true of black Americans who fought and served their country in the Army.
Exactly.
The second thing I would say is that over the past 10 years, there has been a slippery conflation of private criticism with censorship. So yes, it can often feel overwhelming when people online are mad at you or criticizing you, and this was sort of treated as censorship. But censorship is what the government does. Right. When people are trying to silence you, that's censoriousness. And the solution to that is more speech. The solution to government censorship is not more speech because the government is preventing you from speaking. And these people simply believe that you should not have the right to oppose them politically. They don't believe that you should have the right to make fun of Donald Trump. Quite simply, they don't believe you should have the right. They think it should be illegal not to like them, fundamentally. And that requires a level of state control that is a complete anathema to the Constitution and to the conceptions of freedom behind the Constitution. That said, we have a long tradition of suppressing speech that we don't like. If you go back to the late 19th century, people like the crusading anti-lynching journalist Ida Wells, her newspaper was destroyed because she committed the thought crime of suggesting that sometimes white women do actually willingly sleep with black men. So, we have a long history of a certain kind of censorship, of mob censorship, trying to, people mob censoriousness. But what is happening now is sort of based on this, we have to censor the left because they were censoring us first. And the truth is, no, there's a distinction between people, behaving in ways that are, not ethical in terms of how they're trying to shut people up, and the government saying, you're not allowed to say this or we're going to take your job.
Jeremy, I want to get back to something that you said about Ben Shapiro being one of the free speech absolutists who has maintained some ideological consistency, pointing out that when the left takes power again, Republicans don't want to be punished in some ways. But what I've heard in my conversations with people this week trying to understand what exactly is going on here is that a lot of Republicans still feel like they're deplatformed, and that the argument that original position of wanting to be free speech absolutist has sort of gone out the window. There's also this new idea that MAGA has a purchasing power that they've never had before. I mean, can you explain that a little bit and what you're hearing from your sources about this sort of newfound cultural cachet?
Right. Well, it's very hard to reconcile those two, right? Because on the one hand, they are in power. They have done something really that they have long accused us in the media of doing ourselves, which, I'll only speak for my experience at the New York Times, but I'm not colluding, and I know my colleagues are not colluding with members of the Democratic Party leadership as I write my articles, right? This is something, however, that a lot of right-wing podcasters and media writers do. I mean, there's this long history of, especially during Trump's first campaign, Trump and his staff working with media players at outlets like Breitbart to push forward their agenda, especially on issues like immigration. So there's always a bit of a victimization narrative that the right likes to play, and they love it when they can attack the mainstream media as being solidly, like monolithically against them. You know, that was probably truer than it is today. You know, maybe back in the 80s and the 70s, before you had the advent of talk radio, before you had certainly podcasts, and let's not forget Fox News. That is the big thing. Exactly right. So this idea that they're deplatformed, that they don't have a voice, that they don't have power when they control the three branches of the American government is it doesn't really pass the sniff test, does it?
You know, talk about projection. Hey, Adam, speaking of reconcile this, if you will. Stephen Miller put out a tweet in 2022 that reads, "If the idea of free speech enrages you, the cornerstone of democratic self-government, then I regret to inform you that you are a fascist." And then in May of 2024, this tweet from Charlie Kirk, which I 100% agree with. He wrote, "Hate speech does not exist legally in America. There's ugly speech, there's gross speech, there's evil speech, and all of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free." These are two people. One is the deputy White House chief of staff. The other one was so closely tied ideologically and personally with the Trump White House and with the president in particular. Why is it that it seems as though the president and his administration are what they're doing now is counter to the sentiments of those two tweets from years ago?
Well, I would say that, yes, that Charlie Kirk tweet on speech is 100% correct. You know, all these statements really about, you know, how it's fascism to censor and we're not going to weaponize the Justice Department, these really read now more like statements of intent of what their actual agenda is. I mean, you can see similar tweets from Brennan Carr. I mean, I think, you know, the divide right now in reactions on the right is really this question of, you know, is the left ever going to hold power again? Because I think if you weaponize government in this way, your purpose is to prevent the opposition from ever holding power again. That's why you go after liberal organizations because they have liberal views. That's why you try to censor people who criticize the president.
That part.
That exactly. If you don't think they're going to be in power, why would you be worried about the shoe being on the other foot? Jeremy Peters and Adam Sorrell, thank you so much for joining us this morning